A successful but arrogant tech mogul learns he must undergo a life-saving surgery performed by the humble Dr. Emily Stone, whose rural background he openly ridicules. Now she needs to overcome past hurts to save his life. Richard Matthews' sleek black car contrasted sharply with the dusty roads and golden fields of Pine Meadows as it wound through the sprawling countryside. The vibrant hues of Silicon Valley, with its gleaming glass and steel, were miles away, both literally and figuratively. As he approached the town, his gaze swept over the quaint homes and small shops lining the main street, each adorned with hanging flower baskets and rustic signs. The town's charm was undeniable, yet Richard's expression remained unimpressed, his eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses, reflecting a mix of curiosity and disdain. As he stepped out of the car, the crisp, fresh air filled his lungs, an unwelcome change from the filtered air of his corporate office. The tranquility of the town square, with children playing near a gurgling fountain and elderly couples strolling hand in hand, seemed like a scene from another era. Richard checked his watch impatiently, his body stiff from the long drive, but more so from the anticipation of what lay ahead. He was here out of necessity, not choice. The local clinic, which housed the only specialist capable of performing his needed surgery, was his final stop. As he walked towards the clinic, his leather shoes tapping on the cobblestone path, the locals' curious eyes followed him. They were used to newcomers, but Richard's air of city sophistication made him stand out like a sore thumb. "Mr. Matthews, welcome to Pine Meadows," greeted Dr. Emily Stone, appearing at the clinic's entrance. Her smile was warm, her hand extended in a gesture of welcome that felt overly familiar to Richard's reserved demeanor. "Dr. Stone," Richard replied curtly, shaking her hand with a firmness that hinted at his reluctance. He took in her appearance, a plain green scrub suit and her hair tied back neatly. No frills, no nonsense. His mind raced, evaluating her capability based on her unassuming presence. Could someone from such a backwater really manage a complex surgery? Inside the clinic, the walls were adorned with certificates and local art, a stark contrast to the sterile, high-tech environment Richard was accustomed to. Emily led him through a small hallway into her office, a cozy room with a large oak desk and a couple of comfortable chairs. The simplicity of the setup did little to ease his skepticism. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Matthews. We've prepared everything for your surgery tomorrow," Emily said, indicating the chair across from her desk. As she spoke, Richard's eyes scanned the diplomas on the wall, searching for reassurance in the form of prestigious medical institutions. "Dr. Stone, I trust you understand the complexity of my situation," Richard began, his tone formal. "I need to be assured that I am in capable hands." "Of course," Emily replied, her voice steady. "I understand your concerns, but please rest assured that you're receiving the best care possible here. I've performed numerous procedures with a focus on minimally invasive techniques, which is exactly what we've planned for you." Richard nodded, only half listening as he pondered over the implications of entrusting his well-being to this rural doctor. His mind was clouded with doubts, his usual confidence shaken by the unfamiliarity of his surroundings. As Emily explained the surgical procedure, her words punctuated by the occasional smile meant to reassure. Richard found himself distracted by the view outside her window, a sprawling field bathed in sunset. The beauty of the scene was lost on him, his thoughts already racing ahead to the recovery phase and his return to the city. The consultation concluded with Emily offering a tour of the facility, which Richard accepted with a non-committal grunt. As they walked through the small but immaculately clean surgical ward, he couldn't help but notice the outdated equipment. However, the staff's friendly nods and genuine smiles as they passed by provided a stark contrast to the impersonal efficiency he was used to. "Everyone in Pine Meadows supports each other, Mr. Matthews. You'll be in good hands here, not just with me, but with the whole community," Emily said, sensing his unease. Richard merely nodded, his mind far from convinced. As they returned to the office, he found himself reluctantly admiring Emily's confidence and her ease in this small-town environment. It was a world away from his life in Silicon Valley, and despite his reservations, a part of him wondered if there was something valuable in this simpler approach to life and medicine. The day ended with Richard retreating to a local inn, the reality of his situation settling in. Tomorrow would be a significant day, and as he lay in bed staring at the wooden ceiling, the sounds of the countryside, the chirping of crickets, the whisper of the wind, slowly lulled him into a restless sleep. The morning of the surgery dawned clear and bright, with the sun casting a gentle glow over the quaint town of Pine Meadows. Despite the beauty of the day, Richard's mood was somber as he prepared for what lay ahead. Dressed in a simple hospital gown, he felt vulnerable and out of control, a stark departure from his usual assertive demeanor in business attire. As he was wheeled into the pre-op area, Richard's eyes swept across the small room, taking in every detail. The equipment seemed older yet well-maintained, the walls adorned with soothing landscapes. Emily's presence was reassuring, her calm demeanor serving as a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. "Everything's going to be fine, Mr. Matthews. We've done this many times," Emily assured him, checking the IV lines and monitors with practiced ease. Her team moved around efficiently, their movements synchronized and confident. Richard took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. "Just make sure I wake up with all my faculties intact," he half-joked, attempting to mask his anxiety with humor. Emily smiled, sensing his nervousness. "You have my word. We'll take good care of you." Her confidence was infectious, and for a moment, Richard felt a flicker of trust towards her and her team. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Richard's thoughts blurred, and the last thing he remembered was Emily's reassuring voice, guiding him into unconsciousness. Waking up from anesthesia was like surfacing from deep water. Richard's eyes fluttered open to the muted sounds of the recovery room. His throat felt dry and his body ached, but the intense fear of not waking up had passed. He tried to move his fingers, relieved to find that everything was still functioning. "Welcome back, Mr. Matthews." Emily's voice came from beside him. She was checking his vital signs, her face focused yet friendly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Richard managed to croak, trying to sit up, only to be gently pushed back by Emily. "Take it easy. Everything went very well, but you need to rest now," she advised. The recovery process was slow, and the confines of the small, provincial hospital felt increasingly claustrophobic to Richard. Used to commanding his environment, he found the passive role of a patient frustrating. His recovery was further complicated by his impatience. He was eager to get back on his feet and out of Pine Meadows. However, complications arose. Richard's body didn't heal as quickly as expected, leading to extended days filled with more tests and a barrage of antibiotics. Emily was a constant presence, her patience seemingly unshakable even in the face of his growing irritability. "Your body is telling you to slow down, Mr. Matthews," Emily would say, her tone gentle yet firm. "You can't rush this process." As days turned into a week, Richard found himself grudgingly adapting to the rhythms of the town. He would watch from the hospital window as life unfolded in the streets below. Children playing after school, couples walking hand in hand, and the occasional parade of ducks crossing the road, unhurried by the pace of human life. The enforced slowdown began to change Richard. He started noticing small details he would have ignored before. A nurse's smile, the aroma of fresh bread from the nearby bakery, and the way the evening light painted the room in a golden hue. It was during these moments of forced reflection that Richard began to question the relentless pace of his former life and what he was rushing back to. A week had passed since Richard's surgery, and he was slowly regaining his strength. Eager to regain a sense of normalcy, he decided to attempt working remotely from his hospital room. The hospital's Wi-Fi, however, was not up to the speed he was accustomed to, and his frustration grew with each dropped video call and slow email transmission. Rural charm doesn't quite extend to internet speeds, it seems, Richard muttered under his breath as he struggled to participate in a crucial board meeting. As he tried to push through the technological limitations, Emily entered the room, her brows furrowed in concern over his evident stress. "Mr. Matthews, you need to take it easy," Emily cautioned, observing the multiple screens open on his laptop. "Your recovery should be your priority, not work." Richard's response was sharp, a reflection of his mounting irritation. "Dr. Stone, I appreciate your medical advice, but falling behind on my work isn't an option. Efficiency is vital in my world." Emily sighed, taking a moment to choose her words carefully. "And efficiency is important, yes, but so is your health. Here in Pine Meadows, we believe in a balance that maybe you're not used to." Their values clashed openly for the first time, highlighting the gap between Richard's high-speed corporate life and the measured pace of Pine Meadows. This encounter left Richard simmering with frustration, yet part of him wondered if there might be some wisdom in Emily's perspective. Later that day, feeling cabin fever set in, Richard decided to take a slow walk around the hospital grounds. The fresh air was invigorating, and the beauty of the surrounding nature was undeniable. As he walked, he encountered several town residents who recognized him from his frequent visits to Emily's clinic. To his surprise, they greeted him warmly, asking about his health and recovery. One elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, even stopped to chat. "I heard you're quite the city fella. How's our little town treating you?" he asked with a friendly chuckle. Richard, taken aback by the genuine interest, found himself responding with more openness than usual. "It's different. Quieter than I'm used to, but not unpleasant," he admitted, his guard lowering slightly. Mr. Jenkins smiled, nodding knowingly. "Takes a bit of getting used to, but there's good in the slow pace. Gives you time to think, to heal." As Richard continued his walk, he found himself reflecting on Mr. Jenkins' words. The simplicity and warmth of these interactions were a stark contrast to his usual business dealings. For the first time in a long time, he felt part of a community, albeit temporarily. That evening, as he returned to his room, he found a small basket of fresh fruit and homemade bread at his door, a gift from the nurses and local residents. The note attached read, "Wishing you a speedy recovery from all of us here in Pine Meadows." The kindness was unexpected and something Richard found deeply moving. It sparked a realization within him about the value of community support, something he had long dismissed as inefficient and unnecessary. This unexpected kindness was slowly starting to change his perspective on what truly mattered in life. As Richard's recovery progressed, Emily encouraged him to attend a local event, a community picnic, designed to foster neighborhood camaraderie. Hesitant at first, Richard agreed, curious about the social dynamics outside the hospital walls. The picnic took place in the town's central park, under the sprawling branches of old oak trees. Families had laid out blankets, and tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, pies, casseroles, and freshly baked breads. Children ran freely, their laughter blending with the strains of country music. Richard found himself sitting next to Emily, who seemed to know everyone. As she introduced him around, he was struck by the warmth and openness of the people. They asked him about his health, but also about his life, his work, questions that seemed to probe gently into his world without feeling intrusive. During a lull in the conversations, Emily turned to Richard. "It's good to see you out here, Mr. Matthews. I think it's important, especially for someone like you, to see that there's a world outside of boardrooms and balance sheets." Richard looked at her, taken aback by her insight. "You think I'm that one-dimensional?" he asked, half in jest. "Not one-dimensional, just focused? Maybe too focused?" she replied with a smile. This conversation sparked something in Richard. As the afternoon wore on, he found himself sharing more about his life than he had intended, his ambitions, his fears, and surprisingly, his doubts about the relentless pace of his career. That evening, after the picnic, Richard found himself alone in his room, reflecting on the day. The conversations, the laughter, and the sheer normalcy of life in Pine Meadows had left a deep impression on him. For the first time in a long while, he pondered the choices he had made in his life, the sacrifices for success, and what he had missed along the way. He stood at his window, watching as the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. The beauty of it was breathtaking, and for once, he allowed himself to just watch, to be in the moment without thinking about emails, meetings, or market shares. The tranquility of the evening was a stark contrast to the constant buzz of Silicon Valley. Richard thought about Emily's words, her gentle challenge to his way of life. Could there be merit to a slower pace? A life filled with meaningful connections rather than just transactions? As he mulled over these thoughts, Richard felt a shift within himself. The relentless drive that had propelled him to the top of his profession was now being questioned by the simple joys he had experienced that day. It was unsettling, yet oddly liberating. He realized that he was standing at a crossroads, not just in terms of his health, but in his approach to life. Pine Meadows, with its slow rhythms and friendly faces, was offering him a glimpse of a different kind of success, one that was measured not in dollars, but in relationships and contentment. That night, as Richard lay in bed, the sound of the wind whispering through the trees outside was more soothing than any corporate victory. He drifted off to sleep, with a mind less burdened by the weight of his old ambitions, pondering what it might mean to truly heal, not just in body, but in spirit. As Richard continued to heal physically, new complications arose that extended his stay in Pine Meadows. One morning, he woke to a dull ache in his side, prompting a swift reaction from Emily and her medical team. After a series of tests, it was determined that he had developed a minor infection, a setback that was not uncommon but still frustrating. The news meant more days in the hospital, more antibiotics, and more time away from his bustling life in Silicon Valley. Richard felt trapped, his initial tolerance for the slower pace of life beginning to wane as the reality of his extended recovery sank in. Emily remained a constant, reassuring presence. "These complications are just bumps in the road," she explained calmly. "It's your body's way of telling you it's not ready to go back to the high stress yet." Richard, sitting up in his hospital bed surrounded by yet another round of medical equipment, sighed deeply. He missed the control he had over his life, the efficiency of his routines. Yet, each day in Pine Meadows was teaching him about patience, something he had never needed to cultivate in the corporate world. Despite his irritation, Richard found an unexpected comfort in the steady stream of visitors from the town. People he had met only briefly at the picnic now came by to check on him, bringing homemade meals, books, and even offering cheerful anecdotes to lift his spirits. Their kindness was touching, and slowly, Richard's perspective on what constituted a meaningful life began to shift. After another week of recovery, Richard faced a critical decision. His doctors in Silicon Valley had been in touch, urging him to return for follow-up care under their supervision. Yet, Emily advised against traveling, suggesting it would be better for his health to continue recuperating in Pine Meadows. The decision was tough. Richard's instinct was to rush back to his life, to his responsibilities. However, as he looked out of his hospital window at the peaceful town, he felt a pull to stay. Pine Meadows, with its unhurried pace and warm community, had begun to feel like more than just a place of convalescence. It was becoming a sanctuary, a place where he could rethink his priorities. Maybe there's something here for me. Something I needed to find, Richard mused aloud during Emily's visit to his room. Emily smiled, understanding the depth of his contemplation. Sometimes the best path isn't the fastest one, she said gently. Maybe what you needed wasn't just physical healing, but a chance to see a different way of living. That night, Richard made his decision. He would stay in Pine Meadows longer, giving himself time to fully recover not just physically, but perhaps emotionally and spiritually as well. This choice marked a significant turning point in his journey, one that acknowledged the value of the slower pace and deeper connections he had discovered in the town. As he informed his team in Silicon Valley of his decision, there was a sense of liberation in his voice. For the first time in a long while, Richard was choosing a path not dictated by efficiency or profit, but by personal well-being and growth. A few weeks into his extended stay in Pine Meadows, Richard found his rhythm within the slower pace of life, but a new challenge was about to unfold. Emily approached him one afternoon with a concerned look on her face as they sat in the small garden behind the clinic. "Richard, there's something important we need to discuss," Emily began, her voice serious. "A large development corporation has expressed interest in building a resort right here in Pine Meadows. This could change our town forever, and not necessarily for the better." Richard's brow furrowed. In his previous life, he would have seen such a development as a sign of progress, but now his newfound appreciation for the town made him wary. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" he asked, the businessman in him instinctively surfacing. They planned to build on the Green Meadows site, which would mean a lot of disruption. "Not to mention the impact on our local ecosystem and the way of life here," Emily explained, handing him a folder filled with documents and artists' impressions of the proposed development. Richard flipped through the documents, his mind racing. This was a world he understood, one of investments and returns. Yet, now he found himself on the other side, concerned about the community and its future. "Emily, what can I do to help?" Richard asked, surprising even himself with his readiness to defend the town. "We need to organize, maybe even fight this legally. Your expertise could be invaluable," Emily said, her eyes lighting up with a mix of hope and determination. Richard nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose. "Let's do it. Let's make sure Pine Meadows stays as it is," he affirmed, his voice firm. Armed with his decision to help, Richard began to use his skills in a new context. He and Emily started by organizing a town hall meeting to discuss the development. Flyers were distributed and social media posts were made, all calling for the community's participation. On the evening of the meeting, the town hall was packed with residents whose faces displayed a mixture of concern and curiosity. Richard took the podium, his heart pounding, not from nervousness about public speaking, which he was accustomed to, but because of the stakes involved. "Good evening, everyone. As you may have heard, there's a proposal on the table that could significantly change the fabric of Pine Meadows," Richard began, his voice echoing in the packed room. He outlined the developer's plans, using the project visuals to highlight the impact areas. The crowd's reaction was immediate and vocal. Many were upset about the potential loss of their tranquil lifestyle. Others worried about environmental impacts. Richard and Emily facilitated the discussion, guiding the community through their options and encouraging a unified approach. After the meeting, several residents approached Richard, thanking him for standing up for Pine Meadows. Among them was Mr. Jenkins, the elderly man Richard had met during his early days in the hospital. Never thought I'd see the day when a city man would fight for our little town, Mr. Jenkins said, his voice tinged with gratitude. You've really become one of us, haven't you? Richard smiled, feeling a warm sense of belonging. It seems I have, he admitted, realizing how much he had changed since his arrival. The meeting ended with a commitment from the community to form a coalition against the development, with Richard and Emily at the helm. They had begun as a doctor and patient, but now they were partners in a cause that united them beyond health. With the coalition formed, Richard and Emily began to strategize their next steps. Richard's background in business strategy proved invaluable as they planned their approach to counter the development proposal. They reviewed environmental laws, sought legal advice, and gathered support from environmental groups. One afternoon, as they pored over documents in Emily's office, Richard said, "We need to show not just the negative impacts, but also how the town can thrive without this development. Maybe propose alternative projects that align with the community's values." Emily nodded, impressed by his insight. "That's a great point. We could focus on eco-tourism. It's sustainable and would attract visitors without overwhelming our resources." They spent days preparing a detailed presentation which included potential alternatives that would benefit the community economically while preserving its character. The plan was to present this to the town council and at a public hearing that would include representatives from the development company. However, as the date of the council meeting approached, a setback occurred. The development company launched a public relations campaign, highlighting the economic benefits of their project to the wider region, which began to sway some public opinion. Glossy brochures and community workshops painted a rosy picture of jobs and improved infrastructure. Richard and Emily watched this development with concern. "They're good," Richard admitted grudgingly. "They know exactly how to appeal to economic anxieties." Despite the challenge, they pressed on, refining their arguments and strengthening their alliances within the community. The setback only deepened Richard's resolve to protect the town he was growing to love. As the struggle against the development continued, Richard found himself increasingly involved in community life beyond the immediate campaign. He attended local events, participated in community service days, and even joined a local advisory board. Through these activities, his relationship with Emily and other townspeople deepened. One sunny Saturday, Richard joined a group of volunteers to help restore the town's community garden. As he worked alongside Emily, planting flowers and painting fences, he felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose he had rarely experienced in his corporate life. Later, as they took a break, Emily handed Richard a homemade lemonade. "You know, I never would have thought the hotshot CEO who walked into my clinic would end up digging in the dirt with the rest of us," she teased gently. Richard laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Neither did I. But there's something satisfying about this, about actually seeing the immediate impact of your work." Their conversation drifted to more personal topics, and Richard found himself sharing more about his past, his ambitions, and even his uncertainties about returning to his old life. Emily listened, her presence easy and comforting. It was during these moments that Richard realized how much he had changed since coming to Pine Meadows. He was no longer just a visitor, but an active participant in the life of the community. And his feelings for Emily were deepening, complicating his thoughts about the future. As the day ended, and they sat watching the sunset over the newly revitalized garden, Richard felt a profound connection to the town and to Emily. It was clear that Pine Meadows was no longer just a place of recovery, but a potential home. The campaign against the resort development had gained momentum, but it was not without its complications. As Richard immersed himself further into the affairs of Pine Meadows, his past life in Silicon Valley began to pull at him. His former colleagues, aware of his extended absence, started pressing him to return and handle critical business decisions. One evening, Richard received a call from his company's board, urging him to come back. "We need your leadership now more than ever," his business partner insisted over the phone. The discussion left Richard torn. His sense of duty to his company clashed with his newfound commitment to Pine Meadows. The next day, Richard shared his dilemma with Emily as they prepared for another community meeting. "I never expected to be so involved here, or to feel so conflicted about returning to my old life," he confessed. Emily listened sympathetically. "It's never easy to balance two worlds," she remarked, "but maybe this is a chance to redefine what's truly important to you." Their conversation was cut short as they arrived at the meeting, where tensions were high. The developers had sent representatives to sway the community with promises of economic growth and prosperity. Richard found himself debating fiercely against these claims, armed with data and community testimonials. After the meeting, feeling drained yet more resolved, Richard reflected on Emily's words. He realized that his involvement in Pine Meadows had grown beyond mere opposition to a development project. It had become a vital part of his identity. As the day of the public hearing approached, the community's resistance was tested. The developers unveiled a revised plan with more attractive perks for the town, causing some residents to reconsider their opposition. The allure of new jobs and infrastructure improvements tempted those whose livelihoods were precarious. Richard and Emily worked tirelessly, meeting with community leaders and organizing small discussion groups to reaffirm the long-term benefits of preserving the town's character. It was during one of these sessions that Richard experienced a pivotal revelation. A local farmer, during a heated debate, pointed out, "It's not just about what we gain now, but what we're handing down to our kids. We can't sell out their future for a quick profit today." This statement struck a chord with Richard. He had been so focused on winning the immediate battle that he hadn't fully considered the long-term legacy of his actions, both here and in his corporate life. The realization deepened his resolve to fight not just as a resident of Pine Meadows, but as someone who wanted to leave a positive mark on the world. The day of the hearing arrived, and the town hall was packed with residents and media. Richard stood before the crowd, his speech reflecting his new perspective. "This isn't just about resisting change or rejecting development," he began. "It's about ensuring that any change aligns with the values and needs of this community." His words resonated with many in the room, strengthening the town's united front. The hearing ended with a decision to delay the project, pending further environmental reviews, a significant victory for the coalition. As the crowd dispersed, Emily approached Richard, a smile spreading across her face. "You were amazing today," she said. "No matter what you decide about going back to Silicon Valley, you've made a real difference here." Richard felt a profound sense of accomplishment and connection. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace with the path he was on, grateful for the unexpected journey that Pine Meadows had offered him. In the weeks following the public hearing, the community's spirit of unity was palpable. Richard took this time to dive deeper into the fabric of Pine Meadows, joining Emily on visits to local farms, schools, and small businesses. These visits were part of their ongoing effort to document the unique aspects of the town, which they planned to showcase in their continued campaign against the resort development. One sunny afternoon, Richard and Emily visited a local organic farm that supplied many of the town's restaurants with fresh produce. As they walked through rows of vibrant vegetables, the farmer, a robust woman named Martha, shared her philosophy of sustainable farming. "It's all about nurturing the land so it can continue to nurture us," Martha explained. Richard listened intently, realizing how each story of Pine Meadows added layers to his understanding of the community's value. Later, sitting with Emily at a small cafe downtown, Richard reflected on what he had learned. And every part of this town has a story, a life interconnected with the next. It's not just land we're trying to save, it's a way of life, he mused, his voice tinged with newfound reverence for Pine Meadows. Emily nodded, her eyes bright with appreciation for his insight. That's exactly it, Richard. Exactly. And it's why our fight against the resort isn't just a battle, it's a commitment to preserve these stories. Emboldened by the stories they'd gathered, Richard and Emily organized a community event to rally further support and celebrate Pine Meadows' unique character. The event was a mix of a town fair and an informational rally, held in the Central Park with booths displaying local crafts, food, and presentations on the environmental and social impacts of the proposed development. Richard took the stage to address the crowd, his heart full as he looked out over the faces of many he now considered friends. Today, we celebrate Pine Meadows, not just as a place on a map, but as a community with a deep and vibrant soul, he began, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. He spoke about the stories they'd collected, from Martha's farm to the local school's environmental club, weaving a narrative of a community rich in tradition and innovation. Let us remember, when we stand together, we stand strong. Let's protect our home, not just for us, but for future generations, Richard concluded, his speech met with cheers and applause. The event was a success, reinvigorating the town's resolve to fight the resort development. As people mingled, shared food, and laughed together, the sense of community solidarity was stronger than ever. Emily approached Richard as he stepped down from the stage, her eyes shining with pride. "What, you've really become a part of this place," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Richard smiled, feeling a profound connection to both the town and to Emily. "I can't imagine being anywhere else," he admitted, realizing how much he had changed since his arrival in Pine Meadows. As the day of the final decision on the development project approached, tension in Pine Meadows was palpable. Richard spent the evening before in preparation, reviewing notes and discussing last-minute strategies with Emily and the legal team they had assembled. They gathered in Emily's clinic, which had become their unofficial headquarters, poring over maps and environmental reports. "We've got a strong case, but it's going to come down to how well we present it tomorrow," Emily said, looking over the top of her glasses at Richard. "You're good under pressure, Richard. You'll need to be at your best." Richard nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We'll make it work. This town is worth fighting for," he replied, his voice steady but his mind racing with scenarios. Later that night, unable to sleep, Richard took a walk under the starlit sky. The quiet streets of Pine Meadows, lined with softly glowing lamps and the gentle rustle of trees, contrasted starkly with the sleepless buzz of Silicon Valley. It was here, in this moment of solitude, that Richard fully realized how much his life had changed since arriving in Pine Meadows. No longer was he the distant, driven CEO. He had become a community leader, deeply entwined with the life and future of this small town. His reflections were interrupted by a gentle hand on his shoulder. It was Emily who had followed him out. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, a soft smile on her face. "Just thinking about tomorrow," Richard admitted, "and about all that's happened since I came here." Emily nodded, standing beside him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've made a difference, Richard. Don't forget that." They stood together in silence, drawing comfort from each other's presence as the night deepened around them. The next day, the community center was packed as the town council convened to make its final decision on the development project. Richard presented their case with conviction, showcasing the environmental studies and community impact assessments they had prepared. He spoke not just with facts and figures, but with stories of the people and the land that would be affected by the development. As the council deliberated, the room buzzed with quiet conversations and anxious glances. Finally, the council returned, and the mayor announced their decision. The development proposal was rejected. The room erupted in applause and cheers, with residents embracing and congratulating each other. Richard felt a surge of relief and joy. He had helped save Pine Meadows, not just its land, but its soul. After the celebration began to settle, Emily approached him, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. "You did it, Richard," she said, her voice full of emotion. "We did it." Richard smiled, his heart full. "We did it together," he corrected gently, knowing this victory was not his alone. In the days that followed, Richard's commitment to Pine Meadows only deepened. He decided to stay in the town, investing in local projects that promoted sustainable development and community well-being. His relationship with Emily also flourished, grounded in the shared love for the town they had fought to protect. As Richard sat on his porch one evening, looking out over the fields and hills of Pine Meadows, he realized he had found what he had been searching for all along, a sense of purpose and a place to call home. The town had changed him, and in turn, he had helped change its destiny. The morning of the final showdown dawned crisp and clear in Pine Meadows, the sun casting long shadows across the quaint town. Richard felt the weight of the day ahead as he prepared himself, not just with documents and notes, but mentally and emotionally for what was to come. At the community center, where the last stand against the resort development was to be held, townspeople gathered in solidarity. Richard Towers, with Emily by his side, walked into the room, greeted by nods and murmurs of support. The developers, their lawyers and representatives, sat on the opposite side, files and laptops ready. The meeting began with the developers presenting their revised proposal, emphasizing the supposed economic benefits and minimized environmental impacts. Richard listened intently, noting every point and counterpoint he would need to address. When it was his turn to speak, Richard rose, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. He began methodically dismantling the developers' arguments, using the community's extensive research and the environmental reports they had commissioned. He spoke not just of the tangible losses, but of the intangible, of community, heritage, and sustainability. As he concluded his presentation, the room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The council members whispered among themselves, reviewing notes and nodding occasionally. Richard sat down, feeling exhausted yet hopeful as he exchanged a tentative smile with Emily. The debate that followed was intense. Representatives from both sides engaged in heated discussions, with the developers pushing back hard against Richard's points. But Richard, fueled by months of preparation and a deep commitment to Pine Meadows, responded with precision and passion. As the hours ticked by, the community's resolve was tested. Richard could see the strain on the faces around him, the worry that despite their best efforts, the development might still proceed. During a brief recess, he stepped outside, taking deep breaths of the fresh, pine-scented air, trying to gather strength for the next round. When the meeting resumed, Richard focused on the long-term vision for Pine Meadows. He presented alternative development plans that aligned with the town's values, showcasing projects from other communities that had successfully integrated economic growth with environmental stewardship. The developers, sensing the shift in the room, tried to undercut his proposals, questioning their feasibility and economic impact. But Richard, backed by Emily's medical insights on community health and other expert testimonies, held firm. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows, the council called for a final round of comments. One by one, residents stood, sharing personal stories of what Pine Meadows meant to them, lending emotional depth to the factual debate. By the time the council was ready to vote, the community's unity and Richard's leadership had clearly made an impact. The room held its breath as the council members cast their votes. As the council members deliberated, Richard reflected on the sacrifices he had made since arriving in Pine Meadows. He had given up his fast-paced life in Silicon Valley, redirected his career focus, and now he was deeply embedded in the fabric of this small town. These were not losses, he realized, but investments in a different kind of future, one richer in relationships and community ties. The room hushed as the council began to announce their decision. One by one, they voiced their votes, each no to the development echoing affirmatively across the room. When the final vote was cast, a wave of relief and triumph swept through the community center. The development was officially denied. Pine Meadows would remain untouched by the proposed resort. Cheers and applause broke out among the townspeople. Richard felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Emily, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "You did it, Richard. We did it," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "It was a team effort," Richard replied, his voice thick with emotion. He realized then that the sacrifice of his old life had led him to find something much more valuable, a home and a purpose. In the days following the council's decision, the atmosphere in Pine Meadows was celebratory but also contemplative. The community had come together like never before, and this unity sparked initiatives to preserve and protect the town's unique qualities for future generations. Richard, now a key figure in these efforts, worked alongside Emily and other leaders to establish a community trust. This trust was aimed at overseeing sustainable development projects that would benefit Pine Meadows without compromising its character. During this time, Richard also made a personal decision that would cement his commitment to his new life. He proposed to Emily in the very garden where they had spent many hours planning their strategies. The proposal was simple but heartfelt, symbolizing not just his love for her, but his dedication to the life they were building together. Emily accepted with a joyous yes, and the news of their engagement brought even more happiness to the town. The couple envisioned a future where they could blend their professional skills with their personal beliefs to lead Pine Meadows toward a thriving, sustainable future. As Richard walked through the town one evening, seeing the lights in the homes of people he now considered friends, he felt a profound sense of belonging. Pine Meadows was no longer just a place he had come to for recovery. It had become his home, his heart, his haven. Following the victory against the development project and his engagement to Emily, Richard found himself deeply involved in planning for the future. Together with the community trust, they launched several initiatives, including a local farmers market, a renewable energy project, and a series of workshops on sustainable living. These projects not only strengthened the town's economy, but also its sense of identity. Richard was often at the forefront, using his business acumen to secure funding and partnerships that respected the community's values. His transformation from a high-powered CEO to a community-focused leader was complete, and he relished the new challenges that came with this role. One crisp morning, as Richard and Emily walked through the newly established market, they saw the tangible results of their efforts. Stalls brimming with local produce, handmade crafts, and community members laughing and chatting, a stark contrast to the impersonal transactions Richard had once overseen in the corporate world. "Look at all of this." Emily gestured broadly at the bustling market. "You helped make this happen, Richard." Richard smiled, his arm around Emily. "And we made this happen," he corrected, feeling immense pride not only in the market, but in the deeper, more meaningful life he had found here. As Richard and Emily planned their wedding, which was to be held in the heart of Pine Meadows, they also envisioned their future roles in the community. They discussed expanding the community trust to include educational programs that could teach other towns about sustainability and resilience. Their wedding day arrived, bathed in the golden light of a perfect autumn afternoon. The entire town turned out, celebrating not just their union, but the spirit of community that had grown even stronger through their efforts. The ceremony was held in the community garden, now fully restored and blooming, symbolizing the growth and renewal that Richard and Emily had fostered in Pine Meadows. As they exchanged vows, Richard looked out over the faces of their friends and neighbors, feeling a profound connection to each person there. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, from a reluctant patient to a passionate advocate and leader. Pine Meadows had changed him in ways he could never have imagined, teaching him the value of community, connection, and a slower, more intentional way of life. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued under the stars, Richard took a moment to stand back and take it all in. He realized that Pine Meadows was no longer just a place he had chosen. It was a part of him now. Emily joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, following his gaze across the happy crowd. "Just how lucky I am," Richard replied, squeezing her hand. "Not just to have found you, but to have found a life that truly matters." They stood together, looking forward to a future that promised not just personal happiness, but the opportunity to make a lasting impact on the world around them. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button.